All right, so get ready, because today we're diving into one of the most chilling mysteries of the 20th century, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Picture this. 1959, the freezing Ural Mountains of Russia. 9 experienced hikers are found dead. But this is no ordinary hiking accident. Their tent was slashed open from the inside. Bodies scattered, some with injuries that just don't add up. It's the kind of story that'll keep you up at night wondering what really happened.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this case continues to fascinate people even after all these years. Despite years of investigation, tons of theories, they even reopened the case in 2019, and still, we're left with more questions than answers.
Exactly, and that's precisely why we're here today. We've got a ton of research lined up for this deep dive. Eyewitness accounts, official reports, all the scientific analysis, and we're going to sift through it all with you. We'll examine those known facts and see what conclusions you might draw from this mystery.
Exactly. And remember, we're not necessarily trying to crack the case wide open. The goal here is to really dig into the evidence, see how complex it is, and try to understand why this incident still captures our imaginations all these years later.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's January 1959, the dead of winter in the Ural Mountains. Our group of hikers, they were all students or grads from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, set out on what was supposed to be a challenging 14-day trek to this mountain called a Torton. And these weren't just casual hikers, they were experienced. They knew this terrain.
And it's really important to understand how demanding the Ural Mountains can be, especially in winter. We're talking brutally cold temperatures, sub-zero, blinding snowstorms. It's a landscape that can shift from just stunningly beautiful to incredibly dangerous like that.
Yeah, this was serious wilderness. And that's part of what makes what happened so unsettling. Weeks go by, no word from the group. So, of course, a massive search and rescue operation gets underway. And when the search party finally finds their campsite, it was on the slopes of Kolatsiakal, which translates to Dead Mountain, by the way. Well, what they found was straight out of a nightmare.
Just picture this. The tent ripped open from the inside, like someone desperately trying to escape. Personal belongings, food, even shoes left behind. It just paints this picture of a sudden and totally unexplained departure. And then there were the footprints. A trail leading away from the tent, disappearing into the snow.
Okay, yeah, I'm already getting chills just thinking about it. So let's talk about the bodies, the injuries, all that stuff that's fueled so many theories. What was it about them that was so strange, so baffling?
This is where things get really interesting and where the mystery deepens. So they find the hikers' bodies scattered at different distances from the campsite, some partially clothed, some barefoot. The injuries were, well, unlike anything investigators had seen before.
We're talking internal injuries so severe that they were compared to like a high-speed car crash, but no external wounds to match. And then there were these almost impossible injuries. A missing tongue, a fractured skull, broken ribs, stuff that maybe suggests violence, but there were no signs of a struggle, no attacker.
Right, and those injuries, they're key pieces to this whole puzzle. Like, take the missing tongue, for example. It makes you think of an attack, right? Some kind of struggle.
Yeah.
But there were no other marks on the body that supported that. No defensive wounds, no signs of a fight. It's that kind of contradiction that makes the Dyatlov Pass incidents so strange.
It's this weird mix of injuries, some that point to maybe a natural disaster, others that make you think of something more sinister, but nothing fits neatly into one explanation. No wonder people started speculating about wild animal attacks, people attacking them even, a yeti. But as I understand it, the evidence didn't really line up with any of those theories.
You got it. There were no animal tracks that could explain those injuries, no signs of another person being there, no foreign objects, no weapons.
So if it wasn't an animal attack or someone doing something bad, what could have caused these experienced hikers, remember, to just abandon their tent in a panic like that and end up dead in such strange ways? That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is. And while we might never know for sure, one of the first theories that came up was an avalanche. Try to imagine it. The hikers in their tent, suddenly a wall of snow just slams into them. And that image of their tent slashed open from the inside like they were trying to escape. It kind of fits, right?
Yeah, the avalanche theory. On the surface, it seems like it could make sense. I mean, a sudden, massive force of nature, it could explain that chaotic scene, maybe even some of the injuries. But there's got to be more to it, right?
There is. And this is where understanding the details of avalanches and the terrain, all of that becomes super important. The location of the tent, the angle of that slope, the lack of evidence of snow moving like that,
Yeah.
it all makes an avalanche seem less likely.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What about the terrain and the evidence makes you think an avalanche probably wasn't the main cause?
Well, first off, avalanches leave pretty clear evidence. They tear up the landscape, trees get uprooted, there's this pattern of debris. Those signs just weren't there at Dyatlov Pass. And another thing, the slope where the tent was found wasn't steep enough to be considered avalanche-prone.
So even though that slash tent makes you think they were running from something, the evidence doesn't really back up a typical avalanche scenario. So we've hit a dead end. But the Soviet authorities, they must have some explanation, right? What did their official investigation conclude?
Well, about that. The official investigation was conducted behind closed doors, and they basically concluded that the hikers died from an unknown compelling force.
Helpful, right?
That's not very satisfying. It's like they just gave up and said, we have no idea.
Which is exactly what led to decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. If the authorities couldn't explain it, well, anything was possible. So we have an official investigation that basically tells us nothing, which of course just makes people speculate even more. What other theories were floating around, and did any of them actually hold up when you look at the facts?
Let's dig into some of those, and you can decide for yourself how believable they sound based on what we know so far. One theory that got some attention focused on the indigenous people in that region, the Mansi people. It's a theme you see a lot in stories like this. Outsiders going into a remote area, maybe a sacred area, and something bad happens to them.
Right. I've heard that theory before. It taps into our fear of the unknown, us versus them kind of thing. But was there actually any evidence that pointed to a Mansi attack?
Not really. I mean, there were no signs of a confrontation, nothing beyond what the hikers themselves experienced, no unusual footprints, no weapons, nothing that you could link back to the Mansi. And historically, the Mansi were known as peaceful. It's unlikely they'd be violent, especially toward outsiders.
Okay, so it sounds like that theory is based more on assumptions than evidence. Given that it was the Cold War, I bet there were some theories about spies and secret weapons too, right?
Of course. It was the Cold War. Paranoia was everywhere. People were speculating that maybe the hikers had accidentally stumbled onto some secret military thing, like testing some new weapon, or maybe there was an accidental release of radioactive material.
Yeah, secret weapons, government cover-ups. It's like something out of a spy movie. But was there anything to support those theories?
Honestly, not really. Yeah, the Soviet Union was known for keeping secrets, but there's no proof that anything like that was going on in that specific location. Plus, as we talked about before, some of the injuries, like the missing tongue and those internal injuries, they don't match up with what we know about weapons from back then.
So that theory is out. But I know there's one that we can't ignore, even though there's not much evidence.
You know it. The Yetis. It's just too tempting for some people. They want to believe that the hikers ran into the abominable snowman, that mythical creature of the mountains.
I get why people like that idea. It's like the ultimate mystery, this creature lurking in the wilderness. But a Yeti, really?
It's definitely a theory that needs some healthy skepticism. The Yeti, just like Bigfoot and all those other cryptids, exists mostly in stories, blurry photos, and eyewitness accounts that are hard to verify. There's no scientific proof that it exists. And a Yeti strong enough to take down 9 experienced hikers, that's a tough one to believe.
So we've talked about a possible attack by the Mansi, we looked at the Cold War angle, we even went into the world of mythical creatures, and none of it really explains what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Are we saying this case is just unsolvable?
I wouldn't say unsolvable, but it definitely points to a lot of different factors coming together. The brutal environment, a bunch of strange events, maybe even something we just don't understand yet.
Okay, so we might not be able to pinpoint one single cause for this tragedy, but after all these years, there's got to be something we can say for sure about what happened to those hikers.
There is. We can say with confidence that something happened very suddenly, something terrifying that made them run from their tent in a total panic. And whatever that something was, it involved a lot of force, which would explain some of those really serious injuries.
You're right, but some of those injuries are still a huge puzzle. That missing tongue, the broken ribs, the internal damage without any marks on the outside, those things don't point to just one explanation.
Absolutely. And that's where the mystery deepens. I mean, those injuries make you think there was some kind of physical attack, but since we don't know what caused it, there could be other things involved too.
Like what? What else could have contributed to those injuries?
Well, we have to remember how extreme the conditions were out there. Think about the effects of extreme cold. It can do really strange things to the human body. And we can't rule out the possibility of animals getting to the bodies after death. Finally, think about the bodies themselves moving over time. Natural forces, melting snow, ice shifting, that could have caused some damage too.
So we're left with A lot of possibilities, but still no real answers. It's like a puzzle with pieces that don't quite fit.
And that's what's so fascinating about Dyatlov Pass.
Yeah.
Even with all our science and technology, some things just remain a mystery.
That brings us back to the official investigation and their conclusion, an unknown compelling force. Doesn't really give us much to go on, does it?
I know, it's not the satisfying answer we'd all like.
Hmm.
But we got to think about the time and place. This is the Soviet Union in 1959. Secrecy was huge, especially if something might make the government look bad. Maybe the investigators just weren't allowed to look into everything, or they didn't have the means.
Or maybe they did find something so strange, so disturbing, that they chose to cover it up with that vague phrase, an unknown compelling force. It's like they're practically inviting people to come up with conspiracy theories, like there's something more going on than they're telling us.
Well, that's often what happens with mysteries like this. Our brains want answers, and if there aren't any, our imaginations take over. We start connecting dots, looking for patterns, coming up with stories that fill in the gaps. And when the official explanation just doesn't feel right, that's when you get those conspiracy theories.
So we've considered all kinds of possibilities. We've looked at the evidence or lack thereof, and there's still this feeling that something's missing. Like we're overlooking a key piece of the puzzle.
You've hit on something really important there.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of a mystery like this. It keeps us thinking, keeps us questioning, keeps us searching for that missing piece of information. And who knows, maybe it's you listening right now who will see that connection, that one detail that everyone else has missed.
Okay, I like that. There's still hope for solving this thing. It's a good reminder that even the most confusing cases can be cracked with a fresh perspective. But for now, let's get a little more specific. There's been some interesting research on the idea of infrasound. Have you heard about this?
Oh yeah. Infrasound is basically sound that's too low for us to hear. But even though we can't hear it, it can still have a big impact on us. I have a really interesting area of research, especially when you're talking about the Dyatlov Pass.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about infrasound. What's the connection here?
Well, some researchers believe that infrasound may be caused by certain wind patterns interacting with the mountains, could have played a part in what happened at Dyatlov Pass. It's an interesting theory, but like all the others, it's not perfect.
So we're talking about a force that's invisible. We can't even hear it. How could something like that have such a big impact on those hikers?
That's the crazy part. Even though we can't hear it, infrasound can have powerful effects on us, both physically and mentally. There are studies that show that being exposed to infrasound can cause all sorts of weird feelings, anxiety, dread, feeling disoriented, even hallucinations.
Wait, so are you saying that the hikers might have been exposed to infrasound out there in the mountains and that caused them to feel terrified and panic? Is that why they ran from the tent? Why they weren't dressed properly? Why they seemed so confused?
That's the theory. Imagine this. You're being hit by a force you can't see or hear, and it's causing this feeling of absolute terror, so you just react instinctively. You do things you wouldn't normally do. It's a pretty scary thought, and it could explain some of the things that just don't make sense in this case.
That is a seriously creepy thought. It's like being haunted by a ghost you can't even see. The thing is making you act crazy. But if infrasound was really a factor here, wouldn't the hikers have written about it in their diaries? They kept pretty detailed records, right?
You would think so. But here's the thing about infrasound. We can't hear it. So they might have been feeling its effects, the anxiety, the confusion, without even knowing what was causing it. It'd be like being controlled by something you can't perceive.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see how infrasound could fit into this puzzle. But even if it explains why they ran from the tent, what about those really bad injuries?
That's where the theory gets a little tricky. Infrasound itself wouldn't directly cause those kinds of injuries, but the panic and disorientation it might have caused. That could have led to accidents, maybe they fell, maybe they even trampled each other, trying to get away from whatever they thought was happening.
So maybe it was a chain reaction. Infrasound triggers this insane panic, and then the injuries happen as they're trying to escape. Interesting theory, but it doesn't answer all the questions, just like all the others.
Exactly. It's a good theory, but it's not the whole story, and it's important to be skeptical.
So where do we go from here? We've looked at all kinds of theories. Some seem more likely than others, but we're still left with a lot of uncertainty. What are your thoughts on all this?
You know, I think it's important to remember that some mysteries just might not have clear-cut answers, especially something like this. But that doesn't mean it's a waste of time to try and figure things out.
You're saying that the process of investigating, exploring different ideas, questioning what we think we know, that's valuable in itself.
Exactly. The pursuit of knowledge, the willingness to ask questions, to be open to new possibilities, that's where real discovery happens.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe someone listening right now will see something that everyone else has missed. Maybe they'll find that missing piece of the puzzle.
Now that's an exciting thought. There's still hope for solving this thing. It's a reminder that sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective to crack even the toughest case. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the official investigation, specifically that decision in 2019 to reopen the case. What led to that, and did they get any closer to figuring things out?
Well, there were a few things that led to that decision. People were, and still are, obsessed with this case. There were also new technologies they could use to look at the evidence. And I think there was this hope of giving some closure to the families of the hikers. But that 2019 investigation had a pretty limited focus. They were mainly interested in the avalanche theory.
So they were trying to prove or disprove the most obvious natural explanation for the deaths.
Exactly. But what they found wasn't conclusive. They said that a small, localized avalanche, what they call a snow slab avalanche, could have caused the tent to collapse, and maybe some of the initial injuries. But it couldn't explain everything, not the extent of the injuries, and not why the hikers acted so strangely.
So are we back at square one? No closer to the truth.
Not completely. They carefully looked at some of the big theories and ruled them out, so at least we're narrowing down the possibilities.
I see what you mean. It's like crossing suspects off a list. But we're still left with this big mystery.
We are, and that's where things get really interesting, because it means we have to start thinking outside the box. What if we're dealing with something we just don't understand yet? Something beyond natural forces or how humans normally behave?
Okay, now you've got me hooked. Are you saying there might be forces out there that we don't even know about?
It's a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so fascinating and maybe a little scary. Because when we come up against the unknown, it challenges everything we think we know. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more. The second part has been a wild ride. We've talked about indigenous people, Cold War conspiracies, even a Yeti. We've learned about infrasound, and we revisited those official investigations that just don't give us a lot to work with. But as we head into the final part of our investigation, the mystery remains. And that's part of what makes this story so captivating.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Dyatlov Pass Incident. We've gone through a lot. Theories, evidence, we've even talked about things we might not understand. And now as we wrap things up, there's something you said earlier that I keep thinking about. The idea that there might be something going on here, something we just don't get yet.
You're right, it is a possibility. And it's both fascinating and kinda unsettled. It reminds me of all those things throughout history that people used to think were unexplainable, things that scared them. And then, eventually, science figured it out.
Exactly. Our knowledge keeps growing. What seems impossible today might be normal tomorrow.
So how do we even approach a mystery like this, when the evidence contradicts itself and none of the explanations really work?
I think you have to be okay with not knowing everything, except that we might never have all the answers. But that doesn't mean searching for them is pointless.
So it's about asking those tough questions, looking at things from different angles, and always being open to new ideas.
Yeah, and maybe the most important thing is admitting that we don't know everything.
So where do we go from here? We've gone over the theories, we've looked at the evidence, we know there are things we just don't understand. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think the Dyatlov Pass incident is like a big flashing sign.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, stuff we just haven't figured out yet.
It tells us to be curious, to keep searching, to never stop asking questions.
Even if we never find the answers.
People have been talking about this case for decades. I don't think they'll ever stop.
It's a story that speaks to us on a deep level. We're fascinated by the unknown. We want to understand the world.
So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with one final thought.
We may never solve the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, but exploring it, digging into the evidence, thinking about different points of view, that's been worthwhile. Maybe we've learned something, not just about this case, but about the limits of our knowledge and how powerful a mystery can be.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the unknown. Keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and never stop being amazed by the world around us.